Thanks, Laura. Again, thank you all for coming. This is super exciting to get this year's summit kicked off. I think it's going to be a really enlightening few days for us. Every time I've been at one of these, I think myself and my colleagues, we learn more from interacting with all of you than with each other. So this is a really unique opportunity for all of us to interact, learn from each other, and really advance how we can think about and care for fibrotic lung diseases. I'm going to give about a 15 or 20 minute overview on the care center network and the registry. If you look at what the foundation does, there's a ton that goes on in terms of trying to advocate for patients and caregivers, people that take care of people with pulmonary fibrosis and other interstitial lung diseases. On this slide, you can look at the top left, a lot of activities in awareness and advocacy. Education, from handouts that every week I use to give to patients, to webinars that are on different topics that then are archived and can be looked at in the future. Support groups and other patient support avenues, ambassadors, the call center, and then research, with one of the key projects being the registry that I'll talk about. But kind of underlying all of those different aspects, kind of the machine, if you think of that helps us deliver all these different things, is the care center network. So I just wanted to introduce an overview of what the care center network is at a very high level. So it's growing, it's getting bigger. Right now we have 40 centers. Each of these centers were selected because they had expertise in treating patients with fibrotic lung disease and dedication to improving the clinical care of patients with these diseases. We've selected sites that had a lot of expertise in terms of delivering care. They used a multidisciplinary approach to treating patients. So social work, multiple consultative specialties, access to lung transplant. I said that it's growing, and I like showing these next few slides because it really shows what's happened over the past several years. So in 2013, the first sites were brought on board. There were 9 of them. 2014, it was up to 21 sites, and then 40 sites in 2015. But it keeps growing. So an application cycle for new CCN sites will open in January of 2018. Right now, each of the 40 sites that are part of the Care Center Network are participating in the registry that I'll talk about in a second. The current new sites will not, at least initially, be participating in the registry. If you're sitting there and saying, gosh, you know, I saw that map, and where I get my care is a really, really good place, but it's not one of those sites, let us know or let your providers know, because we want to get more care center networks, with the goal being that we can have excellent care closer to where people live, and then also tap on the resources at more centers so we can get smarter about how we take care of these diseases. So we're looking for sites that have excellent patient care, an established interstitial lung disease or fibrotic lung disease program, consultative services, so multiple specialties, sleep medicine, gastroenterology, rheumatology, thoracic surgery, lung transplant, social work, palliative care. In other words, taking care of fibrotic lung diseases involves more than just thinking about the lungs. So we want to look for sites that have a multi-specialty presence in being able to care for these disorders. Advancing the field requires us to be able to train new people. So care centers are looked to have residents, physicians that are in training, medical students, that have an interest in interstitial lung diseases so that they can learn and be the future of providing care and studying these diseases. We want sites that are actively involved in research, and it can be broad types of research. Maybe they are sites that are performing clinical trials looking at novel therapies. Maybe they're administering surveys. Maybe they're doing basic science research in the laboratory, trying to understand the pathobiology of these disorders. But we're looking for centers that are moving the field forward and in some level engaged in research. A support group should be part of the center. Willingness to participate and partner with the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation and the other care centers in advancing the different programs that we have. And overall, just having an underlying level of enthusiasm to work with a great team to try to move things forward. Some things that are happening in the care centers. So this is an idea or a concept where you put a bunch of these care centers together. So starting at 2 o'clock today in another room, all the lead investigators and their coordinators from each of the care centers will have a 2-hour meeting. We had the last meeting like that in November, and they talked about, well, what should we do? What are some projects that we could work on as a team that need to be addressed? And these are 4 of them that came out that are moving forward. So one was, how can we formalize a mentoring process for people that want to care and study for interstitial lung diseases? How can we teach them? What would be a good curriculum? So we're developing that. Many of you have probably had the unfortunate experience of having a CT done and then being referred on to another center only to be told that the CT you had was, well, it was okay, but it really wasn't the right type and we need to do another one. There is a profound lack of standardization in high-resolution CT scanning for interstitial lung diseases. So we have some of our thoracic radiologists working to put down on paper what should be done so that that mistake or that unfortunate reality of having to repeat tests shouldn't happen as much in the future. We don't know what causes a lot of the interstitial lung diseases, but there's a lot of thought that what we inhale, what we're around in our environment, either work or hobbies, maybe pollution, has something to do with interstitial lung disease. So there's a working group trying to develop surveys so that we can use that as part of the registry to better understand environmental impacts on either having certain types of interstitial lung disease or how that disease may progress over time. And then trying to come up with things, ideas, maybe telemedicine or ways to get further away from these centers into the rural areas of the country where interstitial lung diseases are there, but people don't have as ready access to care. So that's just some examples of putting all these people together in these care centers and then having them work together to try to move this field forward. I want to switch gears just a little bit and give you an update on the registry. So this started about a year ago. I'm curious, I see a lot of familiar faces out there. Are any of you in the registry? That's awesome. Thank you. If you didn't volunteer your time and almost everyone has stuck out their arm and donated blood, we would not be able to make this project forward, so thank you. So what's a registry? It's just a collection of information. We're going to talk in a little bit on the next session about research and moving drugs forward. That usually happens in clinical trials, but a registry is a collection of information that really is just, as you're going through care and living with pulmonary fibrosis, what happens to you, and those data points are captured in the registry. So if you compare a registry to clinical trials, there's some differences. A registry is often larger. It often can follow people much, much longer, but it's more of a real-world experience. It's kind of all-comers. It differs from clinical trials, which is kind of the right side of that slide, where there's strict inclusion and exclusion criteria, so it may not be generalizable to every patient with that disease. And there's strict protocols. You have to come in every so often and get these testing done. So they're very different models. What were the goals of the registry when we thought about this? Well, we wanted to get a cohort of really well-characterized or phenotyped patients with ILD. So what are the diagnoses? So we knew who we were studying. We were really interested in patient-reported outcomes. So there's questionnaires that are administered periodically that try to more objectively assess things like cough, fatigue, general quality of life, and shortness of breath. We thought it was important to study not just idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, which we've moved forward and still need to keep moving forward, but we've learned a lot about idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, but we thought it was important to also study other types of fibrotic lung disease, with the hope being that what we know about IPF from clinical trials, IPF in the registry, could serve as compare groups to help us learn about other types of fibrotic lung disease. And then also, one of the things that when people are in the registry, they can give us permission for is if other trials are coming down the pipe, there's other trials at your center, we can go to the registry and say, well, who might be eligible for this trial, and contact you and say, hey, if you're interested, we've got a new study that looks pretty cool. We'll send you some information, and if you're interested, we'll get you in here and we'll get you enrolled. So to try to facilitate the pace forward of research. It's easy to get into the registry, so it's adult patients given informed consent, really almost any type of interstitial lung disease with a few exclusions at the bottom. And we want patients that aren't just going to be seen at the site one time because we're really interested in that longitudinal follow-up. So what are we collecting? A lot of demographic information. I'll show you some, dive down in a second on what those are. CT images. So those CTs that I was talking about earlier, we're actually going to de-identify them and upload them into a central server so they can be used for research. Patient-reported outcomes I mentioned, and then medical events and encounters, hospitalizations, lung transplant. This is a more detailed list of some of the variables that are being collected. Demographics, age, things like that, medical history, a lot about the diagnostic process. What tests are you going through to make the diagnosis? How many times is that CT reported? Did you have a biopsy? If you had a biopsy, what type of biopsy? How are we making these diagnoses to try to understand that? Are you on therapy, and if so, what therapies? Patient-reported outcomes, and then events like hospitalization and unfortunately mortality. Being in the biorepository is optional. When you're in the registry, if you're willing, we can collect some blood, and we can centrally bank that and aliquot it, and when researchers have ideas of things they want to study, that's all available. So they don't have to come up with an idea and say, great, this is the best idea that anyone has thought of in the past 5 years. Now all I have to do is find 1,000 patients so I can test it. They can say, I've got the best idea in 5 years, call the PFF and say, hey, can I get access to 1,000 of those aliquots so I can do this assay in real time? It involves all the sites. We want about 60% of the patients to be IPF. Our goal is 2,000 patients by June of 18. You can be diagnosed at any time, and we're going to follow you as long as you'll let us follow you. There's a lot of uniqueness about this registry, so it's just in the United States, but as we grow, and even currently, it really geographically represents a lot of our country. That may allow us to see how the same diseases behave differently in different areas of the country. The large number of sites, so I mentioned we're tracking how often people are seen, how often testing is done, what type of testing. Our hope is, as the data mature, we can look back and say, you know what? This is how we should do it. Because when these centers did it in this fashion, the outcomes were actually better. So to try to move forward and say, how should we care for patients with interstitial lung diseases? I mentioned that there's a diverse type of interstitial lung diseases. I think that's a strength, and it's going to be very, very large. And hopefully, with additional funding, we can grow well beyond 2,000 patients. So I wanted to share a little bit about where the registry is as of now. So it started, the first patient was enrolled in March of 2016, and we anticipate completing enrollment in June of 2008. All of our statistics, and I think this graph probably shows it better, we are actually ahead of enrollment, which is for clinical trials and clinical research, not something that you see very often. So in terms of being able to meet our initial target date of having 2,000 patients by June, we're probably going to be ahead of that. So who do we have in the registry? Just a couple slides on the types of data that we have, and you can start to, I think, get a glimpse of how powerful these data can be looking forward. So right now, there's about 56%, 57% of the patients in this registry that have idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, but there's almost 20% that have lung disease that's due to an autoimmune disease like scleroderma or rheumatoid arthritis. We're going to be able to compare those and see how things look across over time. Hypersensitivity pneumonia, something that you've inhaled that causes an interstitial lung disease. Almost 10% of the registry are those patients. And then smaller amounts of occupational lung disease or drug-induced lung disease. We started to get some ideas about diagnostic process. We talk a lot about the importance of having a diagnosis made in a multidisciplinary setting, but yet in our registry, only 40% of patients, at least as it's entered, had the diagnosis made in a multidisciplinary setting. Well, if we find out that that is actually important and we should be doing that, that's a huge, huge gap that we can then try to target to improve outcomes, 60%. just by looking at the registry data. No one, at least myself, I never would have imagined that number. I would have thought it would have been much higher. It tells us how many biopsies were done, were they surgical, transbronchial, or cryobiopsy. We can look at demographics, the age, the gender, what is the lung function at baseline. We can look at comorbidities. How many people and participants in the registry have reflux disease or sleep apnea, suffer from depression or anxiety? What about medical therapy? How many patients are on antifibrotic therapy in the registry if they have IPF? About 2 out of 3. 1 out of 3 are not. Are the medications that are approved for IPF being used outside of IPF? A little bit, 6%. So we can start to get an idea of what's happening, at least as people enroll in the registry. And then as the data mature, we'll be able to see what happens over time. So right now, we have about 1,500 people in the registry. 1,000, just over 1,000, have been in the registry at least 6 months. So we can get some 6-month follow-up. 12 months, smaller, about a quarter, and then smaller as we go further out. But you can imagine, as you continue to come back to your sites, and we do breathing tests, and you fill out the questionnaires, and we ask, did you have any events, hospitalizations and things? We're going to be able to accumulate these data and really learn how maybe some of those things that I presented at baseline, what was done for your diagnosis, were you on therapy or not? Well, what did that look like over 6, 12, 24, 36 months in terms of how your clinical course went? If you're interested in kind of tracking this in semi-real time, you can go to the PFF website. And on the registry, there's a pffpatientregistry.org link. And you can see a lot of these same types of tables that I presented today that are updated fairly regularly just to kind of track what the status is. So I'm going to stop there. There's a lot of time for question and answers as we move through the next session, but I might have to leave early to go to that CCN Investigator meeting I mentioned. So if there are any questions right now, specifically for me on what I presented from about the Care Center Network, or the expansion, or the registry, I'd be happy to answer those. If they come up later, we'll certainly be able to address them as well. But I just didn't know if there were any questions right now.
Sorry.
I think it's on now.
Is it on? Oh. Yeah, okay. I applied for the registry, but I've had no follow-up at all. I've put my name in. I'm wondering if I did something wrong, that maybe I didn't really apply to be on the registry, but I've had no follow-up whatsoever.
So you were enrolled in the registry?
I thought I was.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought I was, but I have had no feedback from...
Have you, but what do you mean by feedback? Like,
well, I said I volunteer for the registry, and that's all that's happened.
Okay, so you may not have been enrolled, because if you didn't sign an informed consent document?
I'm not sure. Maybe I need to go back and re-register. I appreciate that, because I wasn't sure.
That would be great.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. You would have signed a consent form to be in this registry specifically. I'm sorry, the question was, I've been involved in lots of different registries. How do I know if I'm actually in this one? And the answer to that is you would sign a specific informed consent document for this registry. No, you would have to go to one of the care centers, and then at the care center, they could enroll you in person, because they'll talk to you about it in a little bit more detail, make sure you understand what the registry is and you want to participate. Great idea. So you find the list for all the Care Center Network sites on the website. So if you go to the PFF website, we list all the care centers there, and you can find one that's close to you. You can even contact them ahead of time and say, hey, I'm interested in the registry. What do I need to do so that they can be ready for you when you arrive? Thank you. So the question is, do you need a referral to go to one of the care centers? And that's probably based more on your insurance, and if you you know, if you have to have a primary care referral to be sent into, if it may be not in the same network and things. Certainly from a care center site, we don't have to have referrals, but from an insurance aspect, you may need referrals to get into the site if that's how the insurance is set up for your plan. Yeah. Yeah, so there's some studies going on. So actually Vanderbilt here has a large interest in familial fibrotic lung diseases, the same way at National Jewish. So there are areas of the country, those two particular, that are looking at families and have registries and do try to collect blood and information on unaffected family members. Our registry at this point does not do that. Yeah, so the question was, I participated in the registry and I donated blood. What are the specific biomarkers that we're looking at? So from a foundational standpoint, we're not prescribing that. We're collecting the data, and then we're actually waiting for scientists, investigators, to contact us with their ideas of what to look at. And that's moving forward right now. Right now, again, we have over 1,400 different types of biorepository specimens that have been aliquoted and they're ready for research. And what we're trying to do is to work with the scientific community to figure out that's a precious resource. So you want to make sure you use it correctly and don't waste it, so to speak. But we also want to be darn sure that we use it, because if it sits in a refrigerator, it's not doing anybody any good. Yeah.
Two quick questions. One, are the CCN centers also Transplant Centers? And secondly, I think I noticed on the slide, it was a little difficult reading from back here, that the new members of CCN network are not given access to the registry information. Did I read that correctly?
Yeah, so for the first question, which was lung transplant being a part of being a center, the answer is yes, although if you didn't have a lung transplant program directly at your center, and you were affiliated with a hospital that you had a relationship so that was readily available, that could also work. So there are some centers that are closely affiliated with the transplant program, but the center itself is not a transplant program. The registry for the new CCN sites, they will not be putting patients from the new sites into the registries. Right now, if we have 40 sites, all those 40 sites can enroll patients and put the data and CTs in the registry. For the 41st or 42nd, they will be CCN centers and help us with projects, but at least right now, we don't have the resources for them to be in the registry. And I see Scott raising his hand, who may be correcting me in just a minute. Oh yeah, the question was around accessing these data. They're readily available. You do not have to be a CCN center to be able to use these data. Anyone can put in proposals, and again, it's on the website. I'll talk more about how that application process works at the plenary session on Saturday morning. But anyone can really get access to these data and specimens. If you're not a CCN site, we do ask that non-CCN members partner with the site, because the site probably has some more idea of what the data actually look like and kind of make that process go a little bit smoother. But the data are meant for the broad community, not just the CCN centers. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, so the application process is going to open in January. I'm sorry, the question was how long from when a site applies to be a center until they're selected. So I don't have a firm timeline. I know that the process, we're planning on opening it in mid-January. In the past, it's usually been 3 to 5 months for us to get the applications in, review them, query back to the sites, and then make an announcement. Yeah.
And I actually am here with my pulmonologist who does research, pulmonics research and been referred to Duke also for a transplant, hopefully, but Medicare seems to have an issue with that, but we'll figure that out. But I wanted to talk about how the hubs can get with the spoke, because I don't think there's that much sharing of information between Duke Care Center Network and the other spokes.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's an area that we're trying to move forward. So of the 40 sites, I didn't mention it, but there's about 5 of them that actually do have satellite centers. So it's starting to happen, but it's not anywhere near where we would hope that it would be. Instead of trying to set it up in terms of expanding with the hub and spoke model, with the primary CCN center reaching out and having a formal relationship, we took a different approach of saying, well, let's just look at sites themselves. And so not necessarily relying on that hub and spoke model.
Got it. Okay, so what would my doctor do, because he does research and he's had several studies specifically for IPF, what should he do to be able to get information from them, or at least be able to take advantage of the Care Center Network at Duke?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean,
Okay.
So you're not interested in being a care center, but trying to access the information.
Well, care centers would have to do transplants, is my assumption, right? And that's not going to be. And Duke is really about the only one. There may be others that do transplants in North Carolina, maybe in Charlotte, but I'm not aware of them. So that's kind of the predicament we have in North Carolina.
Yeah. So we ask our care centers to try to work as closely as possible with communities and to try to disseminate knowledge. Up until recently, we actually required each of the care centers to have an educational event to try to, again, disseminate knowledge and things as one of the PPF missions. They can still do that, although we dropped the requirement that everyone had to do it because financially some centers just couldn't do it every year. But I'll write it down. It's a really good question. It's certainly something that comes up from time to time, but we do need to again, try to disseminate knowledge outward from the centers. So thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe just 1 or 2 more, and then I think we probably need to move on to get to but okay, I just didn't know how we were on time. These guys are just dying to talk. They're like, man, I came all the way here, and Flaherty just won't shut up.
This is great.
So, yeah.
Do you plan to rank the centers just like the universities are ranked?
Yeah, so we know that Michigan is going to be the best.
By height. Kevin, it's by height.
What?
By height.
By height, yeah. It's by alphabetical order, so Ann Arbor. So actually, it's a really important question. Not ranking, there's several different things. Let me answer this in a couple different ways. One process that we're starting to think about and will be implementing over the next year or so is actually a more formal accreditation process. So we had sites apply and they told us all these things, but we're actually trying to work through, well, how can we actually figure out if the centers are doing what we want them to do, kind of an accreditation, not a ranking, but accreditation. The other thing that we're going to be doing, again, this is a little bit down the road, but as the data mature, is once we figure out clearly things that make a difference in outcomes, all right, things that people should be doing or ways that they should be doing different aspects of care or evaluation, we can then rank and look at what the centers are doing. And we'll be reporting back to the center. So say it's intervention A. It's clear that everybody with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis should have test A. We can look, at least in the patients in the registry, and go to Michigan and say, Kevin, you thought you were the best site, but it turned out that only 53% of your patients had intervention A. And on the spread of these 40 CCN sites, you're in the bottom third, which is going to make me say, I don't like that. Let's figure out why we're not doing test A and move our bar up. So accreditation is one aspect, but then we're also going to be doing that process that I just tried to describe, which is sometimes called like benchmarking, to really give sites feedback on are they doing or not doing things that are important in care. Yeah, in the back.
What about the states that don't have a care center network and a lot of patients that don't go out to get treated at a care center network? They're just not eligible to be included in the registry?
Unfortunately, today they're not. unless they can get to a care center network site. It's gaps. You're exactly right. Not every part of that country map was filled. We hope that as we expand the care centers and fill those gaps with care centers, that we'll be able to come up with additional resources to expand the registry so that all those new centers will also be able to be in the registry, and then the patients in those areas, often rural and far away, we can get those data and see how things behave in that area of the country. Yeah, in the center here. Are all the care centers represented here at the summit? Yes. Yeah, we asked that every care center send their lead investigator, or if they couldn't come because of clinical duties or others, that they send a representative, one of their co-investigators. So our expectation is that every care center is here. I'll know that in more crystal at 2 o'clock when I go to the meeting and make sure. Yeah.
My husband, the last time he was at the pulmonologist's office, he signed some papers, and they did draw blood. And they told him, well, the blood samples were for the University of Michigan and also for the University of Minnesota. Now, does each time he goes to see the physician again, do they draw samples for every facility that is doing research, or do you just keep those samples and then the universities request that?
So good question. Was he cared for at Minnesota?
Pardon me?
Was he seen at Minnesota? Is that
No, Northwestern in Chicago.
Okay, so I'm not sure about I can't answer the Minnesota piece. The Michigan piece isn't because we're doing the research in Michigan, but the central storage of the biorepository is stored at the University of Michigan, where the data coordinating center is also at. So that's why the blood gets de-identified at the local site and then sent to Michigan to be put into different little smaller samples and then eventually distributed. So the research per se isn't happening at Michigan, but it's being stored there, as are the clinical data, and that's why it was shipped there. All right. Thank you for your questions. As I said at the beginning of this, we learn more from these interactions on how we can move things forward than I think at any other time through the year. So keep it up. Thank you for coming here and being a part of this meeting. I look forward to interacting over the next couple of days.